Part 1. The concrete smell hit her first. It was the particular cold damp of an underground parking garage, the kind that settles into your lungs before your eyes have adjusted to the dark. Dana Reeves stood perfectly still at the rear of her father's Ford pickup, her hands flat on the tailgate, and counted the men closing in around her. 6 of them, black polo shirts, thick necks, the loose, confident walk of people who had done this before and expected it to go the same way it always did. The leader stopped 5 feet away. He had a fresh scar above his right eyebrow, pale and raised, the kind that comes from a cut not quite stitched in time. He smiled, though the word smile was being generous. His lips parted and his teeth showed, and that was the extent of it. "Mr. Langdon is tired of asking," he said. "He feels like you and your father aren't taking his generosity seriously." Dana said nothing. Her eyes moved slowly from one man to the next, cataloging. Height, weight, dominant hand, center of gravity. The way the third one on the left was shifting his weight told her his left knee was old. The one on the far right was breathing too fast. Adrenaline. He was the most dangerous because he might do something stupid. Her heart rate was 52 beats per minute. She had measured it in far worse places than this. What the 6 men in the parking garage did not know was that they had not cornered a victim. They had stepped into the final exam of their lives, and Gunnery Sergeant Dana Reeves was the instructor. But that moment and everything that would follow from it had started not here in the cold fluorescent dark of an Atlanta parking structure, but 21 days earlier in a 2-lane road curving through Georgia pines when she had seen the sign. She had been driving south on Route 23, the windows cracked to let in the October air, when the billboard rose up out of the tree line like something that had no business being there. It was massive, maybe 30 feet wide, printed on heavy vinyl in the colors of money platinum and deep navy. A glass tower reflected a sunset that existed only in a graphic designer's imagination. And beneath the rendering in bold capital letters, "Langdon Renaissance, coming 2025. Progress starts here." Dana slowed the rental on. She read the words a second time. The billboard stood at the corner of Millbrook Avenue and Porter Street, directly in front of the entrance to Northwood, the neighborhood where she had grown up. She sat there long enough for a pickup truck behind her to honk once. Then she pulled forward and drove on. She did not say anything about the sign when she pulled into her father's driveway. Walter Reeves was already on the porch, standing straight in the way he always stood, his hands loose at his sides, his face wearing the same expression it had always worn when she came home from a deployment, quiet and steady, and deeply privately relieved. "Gunny," he said. "Sergeant Major," she replied. They didn't hug. They never had. What they did instead was stand close together for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the yard, and that was the same thing. His hair had gone fully white in the 3 years since her last leave. His frame had thinned in the way that happens to men who were once very large and let age take what it wanted without negotiating. But his back was straight. It would always be straight. She carried her bag inside and did not mention the sign. The room she slept in still had the same pine floors, the same thin cotton curtains that softened the morning light into something gentle. On the oak dresser, its surface marked with the comfortable damage of a life actually lived, sat a small velvet box. She set it on the dresser and left it closed until the pre-dawn dark of her first morning home. She rose at 4:30. It was a habit her body maintained regardless of location or circumstance. She dressed without turning on a light and carried the velvet box to the window where the earliest gray of dawn was beginning to separate the sky from the tree line. She opened it. Her father's dog tags rested against dark fabric. Walter Reeves, O positive. USMC, the metal had the particular dull surface of something handled often and handled honestly. She took the soft cloth she kept folded in the corner of the box and began to work in small circles. This was the ritual, not the cleaning, but the contact, the transfer of something from his history to her hands. One of the tags had a scratch across the back, a thin gouge in the metal that ran from edge to edge. Quezon, 1968. Her father had never told her the exact moment it had happened, only that a round had passed close enough to mark the tag hanging against his chest. She knew the geometry of that near miss as intimately as she knew her own name. She had grown up in the space between where the bullet went and where it could have gone. She put the tags back in the box and went to make coffee. Walter was already at the kitchen table, his hands around an empty mug, looking out the window at the bird feeder his wife had put up 30 years ago, and that he had maintained ever since. He turned when she came in. The corners of his eyes creased. They drank their coffee in the silence that had its own vocabulary. After a while, Walter set his mug down and looked at his hands. "There's something I should have told you before now," he said. Dana waited. "About 5 years back," he paused. "Right after your mother." She kept her hands around her mug. "What happened 5 years back?" "A man came by, said he represented a development company, said he wanted to discuss the property." Walter looked at the window again. He was polite, very polite. Said he understood this was a difficult time, said the offer was generous, said I'd be free of the upkeep, could move somewhere newer, easier. He paused again. "I nearly signed." Dana did not move. "You nearly signed?" "Earl stopped me. He came by that afternoon and I told him about the meeting and he looked at me like I had agreed to sell my own grave." Walter's voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I told the man no the next morning." Dana set her coffee down. The sound of the mug on the table was very precise. "You were going to sell this house without telling me. You were deployed and I was—" He stopped, started again. "I was not in a good condition to be making decisions. I know that now." The anger she felt was not clean. It was layered. Underneath it was something that recognized the exhaustion of grief, the way loss can make a house feel like it's made of weight instead of wood. But the anger sat on top of that recognition and was real regardless. "His name is Carter Langdon," she said. It was not a question. Walter looked at her. "You know about him." "I've known about him since I turned onto Millbrook Avenue." She picked up her mug. He put a billboard in front of the neighborhood. Walter was quiet for a moment. "Earl's been keeping records on Langdon and his father before him. He's been waiting for someone to help him do something with them." "How long has he been waiting?" "About 30 years. She took a long drink of coffee and looked at the bird feeder. A nuthatch was working its way down the wood head first, unconcerned with the laws of gravity, unhurried by anything in the world. "He won't get this house," she said. Walter said nothing for a moment, then quietly, "I know Gunny." They finished their coffee and went out to the porch to start repairs on the railing. It was the kind of work that required two people, one to hold, one to drive. They worked without talking much, and the sound of the drill was clean and deliberate in the cool morning air. It was mid-morning when she walked the neighborhood. She went slowly, the way she had learned to move through unfamiliar terrain, taking in what the landscape was telling her. What it told her was that the pressure was older and more widespread than a few months of harassment. The Caldwells were on their porch, Henry in the wide-back chair his daughter had sent from Charlotte. Ruth standing at the railing with a cup of tea and a look of determined composure that Dana recognized as the face people wear when they have been frightened for a long time and refuse to let it show. Ruth was 81, Henry was 83. They had built the house themselves, Henry and his brother. The summer after Henry came home from Korea with 2 bronze stars and a ringing in his left ear that never fully went away. Ruth took her inside, not the living room, the kitchen. She reached into the cabinet above the refrigerator and brought down a shoebox. It was full of envelopes. "All since April," Ruth said. "Legal letters. His lawyers are claiming our electrical wiring is a fire code violation. Our plumbing is non-compliant. Our foundation has an undisclosed defect." She set the box on the table between them. "Every one of these letters cost us money to respond to. Even when we win, we lose." Dana looked at the box, counted the envelopes without touching them. 40, maybe 45. "This is a strategy," she said. "Bleed you dry on legal fees until it costs less to sell than to fight." Ruth Dana. "My father tried to fight something like this back in 1990. Took it all the way through the county court system." Her voice was very even. "The judge ruled against him, said the evidence was insufficient. We always felt something was wrong with that ruling, but we never could prove it." Dana filed that away. Earl Whitmore's house sat at the far end of the block, a bungalow with a covered porch and window boxes that still held late-season mums. Earl himself was waiting as though he had seen her coming, which he probably had. He was 80, thin-limbed, with hands that suggested decades of careful use and a mind that Donna recognized immediately as the kind that collected information the way other people collected nothing out of long habit and longer patience. He brought out the box. She had been told about it by her father, but the reality of it was something else. 30 years of documentation organized by year, cross-referenced, annotated in a handwriting that was small and precise. Photographs, notarized statements, newspaper clippings with dates written in the margins. A photograph of a zoning board official and an older man she didn't recognize having lunch at a restaurant with a handwritten note below Langdon Sr. in Commissioner Dale. February 14th, 1993, Peachtree Club. His father started it, Earl said. Carter Langdon learned it all from him. How to wait, how to use the system, how to make people feel like they have no options. He tapped a folder. But they kept making one mistake. They thought we forgot. They thought our memory was as short as their conscience. He looked at her across the box of folders. We write it down. Dana looked at him. I want to use this, but not yet. Not until we have everything we need to make it stick. Earl's expression changed. The patience in it thinned slightly. I have been waiting 30 years, Sergeant Reeves. I am not a young man. I know that. Her voice was steady. And I'm not asking you to wait much longer. But if we go public now, we show our hand before we have the cards to back it up. Langdon's lawyers will bury us in motions. The story becomes about process instead of about what he's done. She held his gaze. I need you to trust the plan, not the urgency. Earl looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the folder in his hands. You sound like your father when he was in command. He taught me everything I know about holding a line. The black SUV arrived at Walter's house at 11:15. Dana and her father were on the porch working the railing when the vehicle pulled to the curb and Carter Langdon stepped out. He was exactly what the billboard had suggested, a man who had decided long ago that the world would arrange itself around him if he moved through it with sufficient confidence. His suit was charcoal well-made, chosen to communicate that money was not an object and taste was not in question. He came up the walk like he owned it. Behind him came two of his people in the black polo shirts, and alongside him, in a way that was clearly meant to read as casual, but was in fact very deliberate, walked a man in a city council pin, Councilman Brett Harker. Dana had looked him up that morning more out of professional habit than specific suspicion. He was 54, 3 terms in office, up for re-election in the spring. His campaign literature described him as a champion of strategic development and neighborhood revitalization. His campaign finance disclosures, which she had found without any great difficulty, listed Langdon Capital among his top 10 donors. Walter Langdon said from the bottom of the porch steps, his voice carrying the false warmth of a man who used first names as a dominance tactic. He looked at Walter and then let his gaze pass over Dana as though she were part of the porch furniture. Good morning, I hope we're not interrupting. You are, Walter said. He did not move from his position, which left Langdon looking up at them from the walkway. It was a small thing, but it was real. We just wanted to stop by in the spirit of good faith. Langdon gestured toward Harker. The councilman has been kind enough to accompany me. We think there are some real opportunities here for this community, and we'd love to discuss them. The house is not for sale, Walter said. Langdon's smile adjusted itself. Walter, I understand the emotional attachment. I respect it, but we're talking about real financial security for your retirement years, real relief from maintenance costs. I said no. Dana set the drill down on the railing. The sound of it landed in the conversation like a period at the end of a sentence. She stepped forward. My father has given you his answer, Mr. Langdon. She looked at him without hostility and without warmth, just information. I'd suggest you accept it. Langdon turned his full attention to her for the first time. He scanned her from her work boots to her face with the same kind of rapid assessment she used herself, but where hers extracted tactical information, his extracted social hierarchy. What he saw or thought he saw was a woman in work clothes on a porch, and his expression settled into something that was almost paternal in its condescension. I'm sure you mean well, he said, his voice dropping into the conspiratorial register that men like him saved for women they decided not to take seriously. Maybe you can help your father understand that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'd hate for him to miss his window. Councilman Harker, Dana said, looking past Langdon to the man beside him. Harker straightened slightly. Has the city council formally voted to endorse or fund this development project? Harker opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There are ongoing conversations. Has there been a vote? A pause, 1 second too long. Not as such, no. Then the councilman's presence here is personal, not official. That's worth knowing. She looked back at Langdon. Mr. Langdon, you've received your answer. Your continued presence on private property after being asked to leave constitutes trespassing. I'd advise you to go. Langdon held her gaze for 3 seconds. She didn't blink. His jaw moved slightly like he was deciding whether to say something. He decided against it. The offer stands, Walter. Think on it. He turned and walked back toward the SUV. Dana watched him go. She watched him reach Harker, who had walked a few steps ahead. She watched Langdon extend his hand. She watched Harker take it. And she watched in the brief moment of the handshake the pale corner of an envelope disappear from Langdon's palm into the folds of Harker's jacket. She said nothing. She turned back to the railing and picked up the drill. Well, Walter said, adjusting his grip on the wood, I think this needs another screw. Yes, sir, she said. I think it does. That evening, after they had eaten and the dishes were done and Walter had gone to sit on the back porch with his decaf in the last of the October light, Dana found a folded note tucked under the windshield wiper of the truck. She opened it. 4 words, a good soldier retreats. No signature, no return address. The paper was plain, the ink from a common ballpoint. She folded it and put it in her jacket pocket and went inside. The next morning, she found all 4 tires on the rental car flat. She stood in the driveway and looked at them in the early light, at the clean deep cuts in the sidewalls, the particular precision of the damage. She took 4 photographs, 1 from each angle, geotagged and time-stamped. Then she called the rental company's roadside assistance. Her voice, as she reported the vandalism, was the same tone she used to brief officers, twice her rank, precise, unhurried, without an effect. While she waited, she went for her run. Officer Dale Briggs arrived in a single cruiser at 8:45. He was mid-40s, soft at the midsection, with the practiced boredom of a man who had made up his mind about how calls from this neighborhood usually went before he left the station. He looked at the tires. He wrote nothing down. Probably kids, he said. It wasn't kids. I said. Dana stood with her hands at her sides. This is connected to a pattern of harassment from a developer named Carter Langdon. We were visited by him yesterday and given what amounted to a veiled threat. Last night, someone left a threatening note on the vehicle. This morning, the tires. Briggs pulled out his notepad and clicked his pen with the enthusiasm of someone performing the action rather than executing it. Do you have proof connecting Mr. Langdon to this specifically? Not yet. He smirked. He actually smirked. Ma'am, without proof, all I can do is file a report, which I will. He handed her a card. A case number was written on it in ballpoint. Someone will look into it. She watched him get back into his cruiser and pull away. From the corners of her eyes, she could see the curtain-edge movements of her neighbors, people watching from just back from their windows. They had seen this before, the performance of process, the careful appearance of response without any actual response. She looked down at the card in her hand, then slid it into her pocket next to the folded note and went to find out what Marcus Webb had seen. Part 2, he found her first. Marcus Webb was 17 slight, with the particular self-contained quality of someone who had learned early that observation was safer than participation. He was sitting on the hood of a parked car at the end of the block, his skateboard across his knees, and his phone in his hands when Dana came around the corner from the Caldwell's house. He looked up. He didn't pretend he hadn't been waiting. Ms. Reeves, he said. His voice was low. His eyes did a quick scan of the street behind her before settling back on her face. Can I show you something? She stopped. Show me. He held out his phone. On the screen was a photograph taken from across the street, slightly blurred by distance, but clear enough. 2 men in black polo shirts standing beside a late model sedan in a strip mall parking lot 3 miles from Northwood, the kind of forgettable commercial sprawl that existed for the purpose of being forgettable. The car's front plate was visible. I followed them after I saw them in the neighborhood, Marcus said. He was watching her face, not the phone. 2 days ago, they were casing the street, going slow, stopping in front of houses. I wrote down their plate and followed on my board. He swiped to the next image. The car is parked at a warehouse space off Industrial Loop. I didn't go inside. Dana took the phone from him and enlarged the plate. She memorized the number in 3 seconds. You followed 2 men you thought were dangerous, she said. He met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the plate. That was brave, and it was also reckless, and I need you to understand the difference. If they had noticed you, they didn't. If they had, she continued, the situation would have become dangerous for you in ways you couldn't have managed. Bravery without information is just exposure. She handed the phone back. Don't do it again, but thank you for telling me. What are you going to do with it? He asked. Right now, I'm going to trace the plate. She did it that afternoon. The rental record led to a limited liability company called Keystone Property Consulting. Keystone's registered agent was a law firm in Buckhead. That firm appeared in 3 separate entries in Earl's folders, all connected to transactions during Langdon Capital's acquisition period in the mid-2000s. The chain was not a straight line, but it connected, shell to agent, to firm, to Langdon. She had the plate, she had the chain, she added it to the digital file she had been building since the first morning. What she did not have was anything she could take to a federal authority yet. What she had was the architecture of a case. The walls were going up. She needed the foundation first. 3 days after the tires, the community garden at the corner of Porter and Millbrook was destroyed. The tomato beds were trampled, the support stakes snapped, the soil churned, as though someone had worked through it with deliberate thoroughness. A clay pot that Mrs. Caldwell had painted with her grandchildren had been smashed against the curb. Dana was there within 20 minutes of the call from Earl. She took photographs. She measured the depth of the footprints in the soft soil and estimated weight. She documented the direction of the damage, which moved systematically from east to west, which meant it had been done with enough time and enough people to work in a pattern rather than a frenzy. 2 hours later, Marcus came to her with his phone again. "I got them on video," he said. He showed her. The footage was taken from behind a hedge across the street, the phone held low. It was shaky in places, but the light from the corner street lamp was adequate. 2 men in black polo shirts moving through the garden beds with a methodical efficiency that confirmed her estimate about the pattern. Their faces came into the light for 4, maybe 5 seconds. Enough. He swiped again. A second video, the same 2 men, different night at the curb beside the rental car. Dana watched both clips through twice. "You've had these." "Since it happened," he said. His jaw was tight. "I was waiting to see if anyone was going to do something." "You're going to give these to me," she said, "and then you're going to do something harder than giving them to the police. You're going to wait. You're going to keep a backup copy somewhere safe, and you're going to say nothing to anyone until I tell you it's time." His expression collapsed into frustration. "With all due respect, waiting is how this neighborhood has operated for 30 years. "No," Dana said. She kept her voice level. "Waiting with no plan is how this neighborhood has operated for 30 years. Waiting with a plan is different. It's called positioning." He looked at her. The frustration didn't disappear, but something underneath it shifted. He saw something in her face that he had not seen in the faces of other adults who talked about fighting back. He saw the absence of doubt. "How long?" he asked. "Less time than you think," she said. That evening, Dana was in the kitchen, helping Walter with dinner, when he reached under the table to pick up something he had dropped. He froze. His hand came back up empty. "Dana," he said quietly. She was beside him in 2 steps. He pointed. Affixed to the underside of the table, almost exactly in the center, was a device no larger than a book of matches. Black casing, small indicator light, currently dark. Dana looked at it for 5 seconds. Then she straightened up and returned to the counter and said in a normal conversational tone, "I think the porch light might be flickering. Would you check it after dinner?" She did not touch the device. She did not remove it. She filed its existence in the same careful mental archive where she filed the plate number, the shell company, the envelope in Harker's jacket. She stepped out onto the back porch with her father after dinner under the open sky and spoke quietly. "Someone put a listening device in the kitchen. It's not civilian grade." Walter said nothing. "That means either Langdon has connections to law enforcement supply chains or someone in law enforcement gave it to him directly." Walter looked at the yard. "Briggs. Briggs doesn't have that kind of access. Someone above him." She paused. "I want you to behave exactly as normal when you're inside. Talk about weather. Talk about woodworking. Nothing about any of this." He nodded once. It was the same nod he had given 30 years ago when she announced she was enlisting. Absolute and uncomplicated. It was the following morning that Dorothy Hayes came to find her. Dana had known Dorothy for 20 years, a woman who brought covered dishes to every bereavement and sent cards for every birthday, and who had lived alone at the end of the block since her husband Ray had died in 2019. She was 65, wide-shouldered, with hands that showed hard work and eyes that showed something working very hard to stay contained. She stopped Dana on the sidewalk during the morning walk. She looked at Dana's shoes for a long moment before she looked at her face. "I need to tell you something," she said. Dana waited. "They told me about your schedule. When you were leaving, what time you went to the store? I told them. Dorothy's voice was very controlled, very flat. I didn't want to. They have papers on my son Marcus, his mortgage. He refinanced 3 years ago, and somehow the note ended up held by a subsidiary of Langdon Capital, and they told me if I didn't cooperate, they would foreclose. She stopped. I know that doesn't make it right. Dana looked at her. The anger was present, a very real physical sensation in her chest. But underneath it and around it was something more complicated. The recognition that what she was looking at was not a traitor, but a mother who had been handed an impossible geometry by people who specialized in impossible geometries. You're telling me now, Dana said. Because I can't anymore. Dorothy looked up. Her eyes were wet. They called me last night and said they needed to know your schedule for this week. The grocery store, the times of what route you take. Her voice broke slightly and then steadied. I didn't tell them. I called you instead. Dana was quiet for a moment. You said they called last night. Yes. Then they're planning something soon, within the next day or two. Dorothy nodded. She looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just set it down and was not yet sure if the relief was worth what it had cost her. Go home, Dana said. Her voice was not unkind. Don't contact them again. Don't confirm or deny anything they ask. And when the time comes, I'm going to need you to tell your story to someone official. Will you do that? Dorothy looked at her. Will my son be all right? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure of it, Dana said. And she meant it. She did not tell Earl about Dorothy. Earl would have wanted to move immediately to make Dorothy's betrayal part of the public case, and that would have destroyed a frightened woman without meaningfully advancing the investigation. Some decisions in command were not about tactics. They were about what kind of person you chose to be when tactics were inconvenient. She changed the grocery route. She changed the time. She went on a Tuesday afternoon taking the F-150 because the rental car was still on its replacement tires, and she trusted the truck. The Martindale Road Kroger was 3 miles further than her usual store, set back from the road in a shopping center, anchored by a hardware store and a nail salon. It had an underground parking structure that the surface lot fed into a dim cavern of poured concrete lit by fluorescent tubes, spaced far enough apart that there were genuine pools of shadow between them. She had been loading the last bag into the truck bed when she felt it. Not heard it, not saw it. Felt the shift in the ambient pressure of the space around her, the way the acoustics of a room change when it fills with bodies. She had learned that sensitivity in places where ignoring it was a terminal error. She set the bag down and straightened. 6 of them. The 2 from the videos, the ones whose faces she could have identified in court, and 4 she had not seen before. They fanned out in the practiced, lazy geometry of people who had done this enough times to know it worked. The exit ramp to her left was blocked. The stairwell to her right was blocked. They had the tailgate behind her and 18 feet of open concrete floor in front. The one with the scar above his eye stepped forward. He smiled the way he had smiled at her father's house. No warmth, just the arrangement of features into a shape. Mr. Langdon is tired of asking. Dana's hands rested flat on the tailgate. She looked at him, and then in the systematic way she had been trained, looked at each of the others. And on the 4th man, a broad-shouldered figure standing at the edge of the right flank, she saw what she had not expected. A tattoo on the inside of his right wrist, the eagle globe and anchor. Small, faded with age, the kind of permanent decision made at 22 that stays with you at 40. Marine Corps. She held his gaze for exactly half a second longer than she held the others. He looked back at her. Something moved in his face. Ma'am, the scarred man said, we're going to need you to come with us. Quietly. He took a step forward. His hand drifted to her arm. His fingers brushed the fabric of her sleeve. That was their mistake. She moved, not backward, not sideways. Forward and around, using the momentum of his reach to flow rather than resist, her body rotating at the ball of her right foot, her left foot sliding back to anchor. Her right hand came up in a single controlled motion, and the edge of her palm connected with the cluster of nerves at the side of his neck. The brachial plexus, a point where impact delivers an instruction to the nervous system that the brain cannot override. He crumpled. Not dramatically. He simply stopped being upright. His eyes went wide with a confusion that preceded the pain, and then he was on the floor. It had taken 2 seconds. The 2nd man was still processing what he had witnessed when her front kick caught his lead knee from the side. The sound it made was specific and decisive. He went down with a scream that rang off the concrete walls. 2 down, 4 seconds total. The third man charged with his rage in front of him like a battering ram. She stepped into the charge inside the arc of his swing and had him in a rear naked choke before his momentum had finished carrying him forward. She held the position with textbook precision, her body locked against his back. His airway constricted, blood flow to his brain interrupted. He thrashed for 5 seconds. Then he was dead weight, and she let him slide to the floor. 3 down. The remaining 3 had stopped moving. Their faces had changed. The contempt was gone. The casual menace was gone. What was there instead was something more honest. The recognition that they were in a situation they had not been prepared for, looking at a woman who was breathing at the same rate she had been breathing when they walked in. The Marine, the one with the faded tattoo, was one of the 3 still standing. He was not moving toward her. He was not moving at all. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from the range and the mat and the moment before a decision, the face of a person calculating the actual weight of what they were doing. "Stay back," said one of the others, his voice loose with shock. "The conversation is over," Dana said. From the ramp entrance, the sound of a siren. Then 2. The lights came next, strobing red and blue, reflecting off the low ceiling and broken fragments. Doors opened, boots on concrete. Dale Briggs was out of the car first, his hand already on his weapon. He took in the scene with his eyes and in less than 2 seconds had made his decision. 1 woman standing, 3 large men on the floor. It was very simple to him. Police on the ground now. Dana raised her hands to shoulder height, palms open. She did not go to her knees. "Officer," she said, her voice carrying across the space with the precision of someone accustomed to being heard in noise. "I am the victim of an assault. These men cornered me and initiated physical contact." One of the standing men pointed at her. "She's insane. We were just talking, and she went crazy." Briggs nodded. Dana watched him nod. She watched the information land in the container of his existing belief system and confirm everything it already held. "On your knees," Briggs said, advancing. "Hands behind your head, now." The second officer, Ryan Holt, was younger. He had his weapon out but held it low, and he was doing something Briggs wasn't. He was actually looking at Dana, at her posture, at the way she had raised her hands, at the fact that her breathing was slow and controlled. He was reading her the way someone reads a person rather than a profile. "Sir," Holt said quietly, "maybe we get statements first." "She's resisting, Holt." "I am not resisting," Dana said. Her voice dropped a fraction and gained a different kind of weight. "Officer Briggs, I am advising you that arresting me without probable cause, based solely on the testimony of my assailants, constitutes a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights. I am advising you to cease your advance and contact your supervisor." Briggs laughed. The sound bounced off the concrete. "You're advising me." He reached for his cuffs. "I am Gunnery Sergeant Dana Reeves, United States Marine Corps." The words were not loud. They were exactly what they were: rank, name, branch, in order, delivered with the flat finality of an official record. "My identification is in my back left pocket. These men are employees of Carter Langdon, who have been conducting a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation against my family and my community. What occurred here was a lawful defense against assault. The matter likely falls under federal jurisdiction. I am advising you formally to secure the scene and contact your commanding officer before taking any further action. If you detain me unlawfully, you may be charged with assaulting a federal officer." The garage went quiet except for the hum of the lights and the pained sound of the man with the destroyed knee. Briggs had stopped moving. His hand was in the air between them, and it had stopped moving too. His face was a complicated map of fury and confusion and something new. Something he wasn't accustomed to feeling in this neighborhood, or any neighborhood he routinely worked, doubt. Holt had lowered his weapon fully. He had done a tour with the Army, and he knew a non-commissioned officer's tone when he heard it. He knew what it meant when someone spoke their rank before their name. "Sir," Holt said, and his voice was not quiet anymore. "Sir, stand down." Dana held Briggs's eyes. She had held harder things than the gaze of a frightened man with a badge. She simply stood there and let the moment do what it was going to do. His radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice was tight with a new kind of urgency. "Hold position, do not transport anyone supervising captain. En route additional units from state police and NCIS responding." NCIS. Briggs went pale. Not dramatically, just a slight draining of color, the biological response to a threat being reclassified from manageable to serious. He looked at Dana. He looked at the 6 men, 3 of whom were on the floor, and all of whom were now, it was becoming clear, not the victims of anything. He had come to this garage to protect the powerful and had stepped in front of something he did not have a word for yet. The word would come later. The word was consequence. The Marine Travis Cole looked at Dana from across the width of the garage. She looked back. He held her gaze, and then slowly he gave a single nod. It was not an apology. It was something more specific and more honest than an apology. It was acknowledgement. Dana filed that too in the same careful archive next to everything else that would matter when the time came. Part 3. The parking garage became a federal crime scene in under an hour. The yellow tape went up first, cordoning the area in a geometry of official consequence. Then the vehicle's 2 marked state police units, an unmarked sedan from the FBI field office, and a second unmarked car that produced Major Claire Ashford of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, who had driven from Fort Benning in 94 minutes and arrived in a civilian suit that could not quite contain the posture of a field-grade officer. She spoke with Dana for 14 minutes beside the truck. She did not interrupt. Her expression remained carefully neutral throughout, the professional face of a lawyer who had learned that reaction was a resource to be deployed precisely. "Your use of force was proportional and defensive," she said when Dana finished. "It terminated at the point of compliance. Textbook." She made a note on her tablet. "These men attempting to escort you to a secondary location is not aggravated assault. It's conspiracy to commit kidnapping. That's federal." Dana let that land. Federal. The stakes had just changed the way they change when a local skirmish turns out to have been part of a much larger engagement. The 6 men were separated, cuffed, Miranda rights read by NCS agents, who moved with a particular unhurried efficiency of people who understood their jurisdiction was not in question. The man with the destroyed knee, the second one she had dropped, was loaded into an ambulance under guard, his face still a landscape of pain and disbelief. The scarred leader was awake and conscious, sitting against the concrete wall with his wrists behind him, his expression having moved through anger and arrived at the early stages of calculation. Dale Briggs stood by his cruiser and was spoken to by his captain in a voice that was quiet and controlled and contained something irreversible. Briggs kept glancing over at Dana. She didn't look back. He was no longer her problem to manage. He was someone else's. Ryan Holt gave his statement voluntarily and completely. He described the scene on arrival. He described Briggs's immediate assumption of guilt. He mentioned that the department had a pattern not formally codified, but practically consistent, of slow-walking reports from Northwood complaints that were filed and not followed up, incidents that were documented and not investigated. And then he said the thing that made the NCS agent's pen stop moving for half a second he had seen. On the department's unofficial social media group, a photograph taken 6 weeks ago at a golf course in Alpharetta. Chief of Police Raymond Bauer teeing off on the 9th hole. Standing beside him, one hand on a club and the other around a drink, Carter Langdon. The agent's pen started moving again. Dana called the duty officer at Fort Benning and reported the situation in 3 minutes of precise, professionally sequenced information. She requested notification to the Provost Marshal's office and confirmation of JOG support. By the time she ended the call, the infrastructure of a federal response was already in motion. 8 days of leave remaining. The morning after the garage, Dana, Walter Earl Whitmore, and Major Ashford met at Earl's house. They sat in his living room, surrounded by the photographs of 5 generations of Whitmore family, and they spread the contents of the box across the coffee table and the floor. Ashford went through Earl's folders with the reverence of someone handling primary source material, which was exactly what it was. She read slowly. She asked clarifying questions. She cross-referenced dates with a timeline she was building on her tablet. At one point, she set a folder down and looked at Earl over the rims of her glasses. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice careful with something that was close to awe, "you understand what you've built here. This is not evidence of one incident. This is documentation of a pattern spanning 3 decades. Consistent methodology, consistent targets, consistent involvement of municipal officials." She paused. "That is the definition of a criminal enterprise under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." The room was quiet. Earl sat very still. His hands resting on his knees were not quite steady. You're telling me, he said, that what I've been sitting on this whole time is a RICO case. I'm telling you that with the addition of what happened in that garage yesterday and the connection to law enforcement we're already establishing, that is what this is becoming. Ashford looked at Dana. We need the digital evidence. They went to Marcus Webb's house. His parents were there, his mother with her arms folded and her expression one of controlled alarm. His father quieter, watching Ashford with careful attention. Marcus sat on the arm of the couch and showed her the videos on his phone. She watched them through once, then again. Her expression hardened on the second pass, specifically at the moment in the second video when the audio caught the scarred man's voice on the phone done. Tell him she's still not moving. This is premeditation, Ashford said. She looked at Marcus with the directness of someone who did not believe in condescending to 17-year-olds. This footage is the linchpin. It directly contradicts the statements Langdon's men gave last night. It proves coordination and intent. She looked at his parents. I'm going to have a forensic technician come to this house today with your permission to make a certified copy of these files. The chain of custody will be perfect. Marcus's phone will be returned to him immediately. His mother looked at Dana. Is he safe? He's safer than he was yesterday, Dana said, and he will be safer still when this is done. The forensic technician arrived that afternoon. Marcus stood in the kitchen beside his mother and watched a federal agent carefully document the process of copying his videos, and he did not say much. But when Dana caught his eye across the room, he gave her a look that was no longer frustrated. It was the look of someone who had waited with a plan and was beginning to understand what that was worth. The federal investigation moved with a precision that had no patience for the leisurely pace of local process. Warrants were issued within 48 hours. The offices of Langdon Capital and Buckhead were entered by agents who carried out hard drives, filing cabinets, and boxes of physical documents with the systematic thoroughness of people who had been trained to find things that were meant not to be found. Carter Langdon arrived for his first interview with 4 lawyers. He wore a different suit from the garage day, this one a shade darker, as though he had understood the situation called for a more serious costume. His expression was one of refined outrage, the expression of a man who had decided that the best posture was offense. He was the wrong party, the innocent businessman, the victim of an overzealous military officer who had assaulted his security personnel. He sat across from the NCIS investigator and said with the conviction of someone who had said things in rooms like this before and walked away from them, I sent those men to talk to her, to explain the situation calmly. What happened to my people was unprovoked. The investigator set a photograph on the table. It was a still from Marcus's video, the scarred man's face, the phone at his ear, the timestamp. Langdon looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes and went still. I'd like to speak with my attorneys, he said. 3 of the 6 men had already begun the process of cooperation. Travis Cole was among them. Dana sat across the table from him in a room at the Federal Building with Ashford present as her counsel. Cole looked different without the polo shirt and the formation of 5 others around him. He looked like what he was, a 41-year-old veteran who had come home from 2 deployments to find that the skills he had were mostly useful for work he wasn't proud of. I saw your tattoo, Dana said. He looked at his wrist. I know. When you stopped, in the garage, the half step, she paused. That was enough. He was quiet for a moment. I've done a lot of work for Langdon over the past 4 years. Intimidation, property damage, standing around looking large. He looked at his hands. I told myself it was just security work. But you knew. I knew when I saw the neighborhood, when I saw the houses, the people. He looked up. I've been in neighborhoods like that. I grew up in one. Ashford leaned forward slightly. Mr. Cole, in exchange for your full cooperation, the U.S. Attorney is prepared to offer. I'll cooperate, he said. I'll give you Langdon Briggs Bauer all of it. I was present for conversations. I have information you haven't found yet. He looked at Dana. I'm not asking for a deal. I'm asking for the chance to do the thing I should have done a long time ago. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Ashford. The offer stands, she said. He earned it. Cole gave them everything. He confirmed that Langdon had personally directed the escalating harassment campaign. He described a meeting 6 weeks before the garage incident at which Langdon had laid out the operation with the specificity of someone who had done this before the listening device. The legal harassment of the Caldwells, the pressure on Dorothy Hayes, and the plan for the parking garage which was not, as Langdon had characterized it, a conversation, but a planned physical coercion designed to produce a signed document under duress. Cole also described a phone call he had overheard between Langdon and Chief Raymond Bauer. Bauer had confirmed that Briggs would be on duty the day the garage operation ran and would respond to the call. Bauer had used the word manageable, as in the situation would be manageable. The warrant for Bauer was issued 3 days after Cole's testimony. Langdon's response when he understood that the walls were closing from every direction at once was the move of a cornered man who believed that offense was the only option left. He called a press conference. He appeared before cameras on the steps of his Buckhead office with Councilman Brett Harker beside him. He stood at the microphone with the composure of someone who had rehearsed and said that Dana Reeves had assaulted innocent security personnel and was using her military rank as a shield against accountability, that this was an abuse of institutional power, and that he was formally requesting an investigation into her conduct. He looked directly into the nearest camera and said, "This community deserves better than to be held hostage by the personal agenda of one soldier." Dana watched the clip on her phone that evening, sitting on the back porch with Walter. The sun was going down through the pines and long horizontal bars of orange. She watched the clip through twice. Then she set the phone face down on the arm of the chair. "He just called for an investigation into me," she said. Walter sipped his coffee. "He did. By doing that," she said, "he just made this a national story. Every veterans organization in the country is going to react to a decorated Marine NCO being publicly accused by a developer under federal indictment." She was quiet for a moment. He also just handed Ashford the press strategy she needed. Walter looked at the pines. "He's not a stupid man," he said, "but he's been the smartest man in the room for so long that he's forgotten there are other rooms." Harker understood what Langdon had done before the press conference was over. Dana heard about it the following morning from Ashford, who delivered the news with the careful neutrality of someone presenting information rather than celebrating it. Councilman Brett Harker had arrived at the FBI field office at 7:45 that morning with his personal attorney and a request to speak with whoever was handling the Langdon Capitol investigation. He had come before the cameras were even packed up from the previous day. Harker gave them 11 names: city council members, zoning board officials, a deputy in the planning department, a county commissioner, and a retired judge named Gerald Pittman, who had ruled against a property owner in Northwood in 2012 in a case that should, by any honest reading of the evidence, have gone the other way. Dana read the name Gerald Pittman and felt something shift in her chest. She went to the Caldwell's house that afternoon. Ruth answered the door. She had been baking, her hands flour-dusted her apron, the one with the faded sunflowers that Dana remembered from every church potluck of her childhood. She looked at Dana's face and stepped back from the door to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. Dana set her hands flat on the surface and looked at Ruth and said it directly because Ruth Caldwell had spent 81 years dealing with things directly and deserved nothing less. "Your father's case in 2012, Dana said. "The appeal he filed after the first judgment." Ruth's hands were very still. "What about it?" "The judge who ruled against him was Gerald Pittman. Pittman has been identified in the federal investigation as having received payments from Langdon Capital during the period of that ruling." Dana paused. "Your father's case should have won. The evidence was sufficient. It was suppressed." Ruth did not speak for a long time. The kitchen was very quiet. From somewhere in the back of the house, Henry's television played softly. The sound of a baseball game, the commentator's voice rising and falling. "Daddy always said he knew something was wrong," Ruth said finally. Her voice was very controlled, very flat. The control was doing a great deal of work. "He said it to me on his deathbed. He said, 'Ruth, I don't know how, but something was wrong with that ruling.' He never stopped believing it." "He was right," Dana said. Ruth looked at the table, then up at Dana. Her eyes were wet, but her back was straight and her jaw was set, and she was the woman who had lived in this house for 57 years and outlasted every attempt to move her, and she was not going to fall apart now. "He was right," she said. "My father was right." 3 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of doubt and the relief of having that doubt finally undeniably resolved. The DA in Fulton County formally charged Carter Langdon on 11 counts, including conspiracy, extortion, bribery of a public official, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Dale Briggs was terminated from the police force and charged federally with civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. Raymond Bauer submitted his retirement paperwork on a Thursday and was arrested by federal agents on the following Monday before he could act on it. Langdon's arrest happened on a Wednesday morning. The images were on every news channel by noon. A man in a charcoal suit, his hands behind his back, his face arranged into an expression of dignified outrage that fell apart at the edges, being guided from the front door of his home in Buckhead into a federal vehicle. The Renaissance Project was formally suspended. Langdon Capital's assets were frozen. The billboard on the corner of Millbrook Avenue and Porter Street came down 2 days later, taken apart by a city crew on a Tuesday morning, while a dozen residents of Northwood stood on the sidewalk and watched without saying much. There was not a lot that needed to be said. The city council voted unanimously to place a moratorium on large-scale development in designated historic neighborhoods. Earl Whitmore was appointed as senior community advisor to the independent commission reviewing 30 years of zoning decisions. He sat in the first meeting with his hands folded on the table and his 30-year box of folders in a rolling case beside his chair, and he looked like a man who had been waiting for a very specific door to open and who had known that patience was not the same as acceptance. Dorothy Hayes came to Ashford's office with Dana beside her. She told her story in full, her voice steady, her hands folded in her lap. She was not charged. Her son's mortgage note, held by a Langdon Capital subsidiary, and the mechanism of his coercion was transferred to the county land trust and restructured at a rate her son could actually maintain. She walked out of the federal building into the October afternoon and stood on the steps and breathed the air. She looked at Dana. "How did you know I would come forward?" "I didn't know," Dana said. "I hoped." Dorothy nodded. "That's enough," she said. Then she went down the steps and got in her car and drove home to Northwood. 3 days of leave remaining. The neighborhood had changed in the way that places change when a weight is lifted, not noisily, not dramatically, but in the quality of the air and the way people move through it. Doors opened where they had been closed. Porch chairs were occupied by people who had been indoors. The Caldwell's grandchildren arrived from Charlotte for the weekend and ran through the yard in the particular total way that children run when they understand that a yard belongs to them. Dana helped her father with the yard work. They raked leaves and cleaned the gutters and repointed the crumbling mortar on the front steps, the tasks that accumulate during the months between visits. They worked in the easy silence they had always shared, the kind that did not require filling. On the second to last day, the community met at the church on Millbrook Avenue. Dana sat in the last pew with Walter and listened to her neighbors talk about what they were going to build instead of what they had been defending against. A historical preservation trust, a neighborhood archive, a mural project that would put the history of Northwood on the wall of the community center in a form that could be seen by anyone who walked past. Earl talked about a scholarship fund for young people from the neighborhood. Marcus Webb's father talked about converting the corner lot where the garden had been destroyed and was now being rebuilt into a permanent community space. Marcus himself stood at the front of the church and said, without notes, without rehearsal, "My grandmother died in this neighborhood. She's buried 3 blocks from here. This is where we come from. This is what we're made of." He looked out at the room, at Earl, at the Caldwells, at Dorothy Hayes sitting near the side wall with her hands folded and her eyes bright, at Walter Reeves, who had nearly sold something irreplaceable in a moment of grief and had been stopped and had spent the years since being part of the defense without quite knowing that the defense was coming. Dana did not speak at the meeting. She had nothing to add that the room didn't already know, and there was something more important in listening than in speaking something she had only fully understood in the past 3 weeks. The people in this room had been fighting this fight long before she arrived and would be fighting it long after she left. Her part had been specific and it was done. The rest belonged to them. The last evening, Dana sat at the oak dresser in the room where she had grown up and opened the velvet box. The tags rested in the dark fabric. She picked them up. The metal was warm now from the residual warmth of the room, or perhaps from the warmth of everything that had happened in the house around her, or perhaps just from having been held often enough by enough hands that the warmth had become a property of the metal itself. She turned them over. The scratch was there, the thin gouge from caisson. She had looked at that scratch since she was 8 years old. She had used it as a measure of so many things: courage, endurance, the distance between survival and the alternative. Tonight she looked at it and thought about Ruth Caldwell's face when she said my father was right. She thought about Marcus Webb staking a tomato plant in the newly turned earth. His hands careful and deliberate, the way hands are when they understand that what they are planting will outlive the moment. She thought about Travis Cole saying, "I'm not asking for a deal," and the particular courage it takes to say that in a room where you are guilty and know it. Her father appeared in the doorway. He was in his robe, his coffee mug in hand, the white of his hair lit by the hallway light behind him. He looked at her. He looked at the tags in her palm. He crossed the room without speaking and pulled the chair from the desk and sat beside her. They sat like that, the two of them in the quiet of the house with the tags between them and the lamplight and the sound of the October wind moving through the oak trees outside. He did not say he was proud of her. He did not need to say it. The word had never been the right container for what lived between them. What lived there was older and more specific than pride. It was recognition, the recognition of one soldier by another. In the morning, she would drive to Fort Benning and take the connecting flight to Cherry Point. She would walk back into the training grounds with her coffee and her early alarm and the accumulated authority of 17 years of making Marines. She would be Gunnery Sergeant Reeves again, the person her recruits saw before they saw anything else. But something had changed. Not in her discipline or her purpose, in her understanding of what the discipline was for. She had spent her career fighting to take ground in far places. She had been good at it. She had been defined by it. But what had happened here in the neighborhood where she had learned to walk and been taught to measure her breathing and understood that the most important education comes from watching someone older than you, hard things without complaint, was something that took ground of a different kind, the kind that went down to bedrock, the kind that did not give when pushed. She had held the line, and in holding it, she had given the people around her the space to remember that they could hold it too. She closed her fingers around the tags and then opened them again and laid the tags back in the velvet box and closed the lid. Tomorrow she would go back to the work, but tonight she would sit here a little longer in the house her grandfather had built and her father had kept, and that no one was going to take from them, and let the quiet be enough. The wind moved through the oaks. The lamplight held steady. The house held everything it had always held. And outside, 3 blocks away, in the newly turned earth of the corner lot, the tomato plants were already taking root.